It started with a flashy announcement on late-night television. "Tomorrow night we've got something special, folks." Jimmy Kimmel grinned, flashing his cue card. "The president of Burkina Faso himself, Captain Ibrahim Traore, is coming right here to this very chair." The audience chuckled. Some even laughed out loud. "A war hero turned president should be fun," Jimmy smirked. "Let's see if he can take a joke behind the cameras." Some producers exchanged glances. They weren't sure if this was a good idea. True's team had accepted the invitation. Reluctantly, the captain had just finished addressing the General Assembly, where he delivered a passionate speech about Africa's right to dignity, independence, and justice. He was raw with emotion, but composed as ever. That night, in a quiet New York hotel room, Traore sat alone, flipping through news segments, mocking African leaders. His face remained unreadable when his advisor asked, "Are you sure you want to do this show?" He replied calmly, "Yes, let the world see." No one, not the studio, not the audience, not even Jimmy himself, could have predicted what would happen next. It wasn't just another interview, it was the start of something unforgettable. The next evening, the studio buzzed with excitement. Cameras were in place, lights set. The audience had been told to expect a funny segment, maybe even a little roast. Jimmy Kimmel was in his element, shuffling through punchlines behind the scenes. "All right," he whispered to the producers, "I'll crack some jokes. Poke him a bit, keep it light but edgy." The audience wasn't there to understand Africa. They were there to laugh. At 9:42 p.m., the music swelled. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President Ibrahim Traore." He walked in quietly, no big grin, no wave, just calm, commanding presence. He wore his military uniform. It was spotless, symbolic, a statement. People clapped, but unsure. Jimmy stood up, gave a mock salute, and said, "Well, I've never been this close to a coup leader before." Some people laughed, some didn't. Traore nodded politely. Unfazed, Jimmy leaned in. "So, Captain, mind if I call you Captain? Is Burkina Faso a real country, or did Google make that up for this interview?" The audience burst into laughter, but Traore didn't flinch. His eyes were sharp, his voice low. "I came here with respect, but if we're going to joke, let's start with truth." A hush fell over the room. Jimmy blinked. The audience quieted, unsure if it was all part of the script. "Truth," Jimmy said, still trying to keep it light. "Okay, hit me." Traore didn't smile. His voice stayed steady. "You invited me to your country, your stage, and the first question you ask mocks the existence of mine." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Traore leaned forward slightly. "You make fun of us because we're not rich, because our roads aren't smooth, because your maps don't show our villages, but you never ask who made us poor. You never joke about colonizers. You never joke about the billions stolen from Africa." You could hear a pin drop. The camera stayed rolling. Jimmy cleared his throat. I was just joking. That's what we do here." Traore nodded slowly. "I know, but sometimes when you joke about people who've suffered, it's not comedy, it's cruelty dressed in applause." The audience was dead silent now. Some looking down, others biting their lips. One woman in the second row wiped a tear from her eye. And just like that, Jimmy Kimmel realized he wasn't the one in control of the moment anymore. Traore calmly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded photo. It was old, edges worn. He placed it gently on Jimmy's desk. "This," he said softly, "is Alima. She was 6 years old. She died in my arms during a raid funded by foreign weapons." Jimmy looked down. The camera zoomed in on the faded image, an innocent girl smiling with bright eyes. Missing her front teeth, her village was burned, her family gone, but she still smiled, still hoped. Traore paused. "I promised her before she took her last breath that I would fight for children like her, not with guns, with truth." You could hear sniveling in the audience. Now a woman quietly whispered, "Oh my God." Jimmy's hands were suddenly restless. "I didn't know," he mumbled. "That's the point." Traore said, "You don't ask, you joke." While we buried children, a tear rolled down a producer's cheek off stage, and the man once brought for laughs had just cracked open a silent wound that ran across continents no one in that room would ever forget. Alima's face, and Jimmy Kimmel realized this wasn't a segment anymore. It was history unfolding live. "I grew up," Traore continued, "where boys learned to carry water before they could carry dreams." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I watched my mother walk miles under the sun with cracked feet. She carried food for strangers before feeding herself." He paused, eyes heavy with memory. "People talk about Africa as if we are just war, hunger, and aid, but we are love, we are strength, we are the ones who survive what no one else could, and still smile." The audience sat frozen. One young man in the front row covered his face. Another woman clutched her chest. as if holding back a sob. Jimmy looked lost. I thought this would be a political interview. He began. No, Trey interrupted. You thought this would be entertainment, but the world is not your script. He leaned back in his chair. My people have been the world's punchline for too long, but tonight we are not the joke, we are the mirror, the silence. It was not awkward, it was sacred, and somewhere across the globe, millions, who had never heard of Trop, were now glued to their screens, whispering his name behind the camera's producers. Panicked, this wasn't going as planned. There were no laughs, no applause, only tears, but no one dared cut to commercial. Traore turned slightly toward the audience. I came here because I was told this was a platform for voices. He said not just those with fame, but those with pain. A soft sob came from the third row. A young black woman buried her face in her hands. Ibrahim, Jimmy said slowly, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Trop replied. You just have to listen and let the silence do its work. He opened his hand, a worn bracelet sat in his palm, made of cloth and wood. My brother gave me this before he was taken by rebels. He was 12. I wear it not because it's beautiful, but because it reminds me every day that silence can bury stories or it can honor them. The lights felt dimmer now. The camera, still rolling, captured something no script could create: raw humanity, and the world watched, not with popcorn, but with prayers. They didn't know what he would say next, but they had to hear it. The room grew heavier with every word. Jimmy, usually quick with a joke, found himself quiet. The script had dissolved into something deeper. Traore looked straight ahead, voice steady: words have power, they can build or destroy. Tonight I choose to build. He paused, his eyes held a weight that no laughter could lighten. I come from a land where children wake up hungry but still dream of schools, where mothers fight for clean water as fiercely as soldiers fight for freedom. A soft sniffle came from the audience, eyes glistened. Before I was a leader, I was a boy who lost his father to war. My mother's tears taught me that strength is not just muscles, it's love, patience, and hope. Jimmy swallowed hard. The distance between the host and guest had suddenly become a chasm. Here, Traore continued, not to be mocked, but to be heard. The silence stretched, filled with understanding. In that moment, the world wasn't watching a TV show, it was witnessing a man's soul. The cameras captured every detail, the tightening jaw, the soft breath, the shimmer of tears. Trey's words hung in the air like a fragile promise. Jimmy finally spoke, voice low. Captain, you're different than I expected. Traore smiled faintly. Good, different or bad? Different. The audience chuckled, quietly breaking the tension. Different because I speak truth, Traore said. Truth doesn't always wear a smile. Jimmy nodded, almost in respect. Tell me about your people. Jimmy said quietly. Traore's eyes softened. They are warriors, not of violence, but of spirit. They wake every day with hope, even when the night is darkest. The studio lights seemed to dim, spotlighting the raw honesty for once. No one wanted to interrupt, no one wanted to joke, only to listen and learn. Traore glanced at the audience. I want you to see what I see every day, not through news headlines or political speeches, but through real lives, he told. The story of Maryam, a mother of 3, who walked miles each day to fetch water. She smiled through pain because her children depended on her. Courage, a young woman in the front row, wiped a tear. I have met thousands like Maryam. Their stories are not news, they are life. A hush fell. Jimmy swallowed again, voice thick. Captain, I never imagined this. Trop's calm voice echoed sometimes. The hardest battles are fought not with guns, but with kindness and truth. The studio was no longer a stage, it was a shared space of humanity. By the end, no one doubted that Ibrahim Traore was no ordinary man. He was a beacon. The room was silent, except for the hum of the cameras. Trop leaned forward, voice gentle but firm. There is a battle no one sees, not on TV, not in headlines. It is the battle to keep hope alive when everything else is lost. He looked directly at Jimmy. I fight every day, not just with weapons, but with the courage to face the despair in my people's eyes and tell them, we will survive. Jimmy's face softened, the edge of his usual humor gone. I hear stories every day. Traore continued, of fathers walking miles barefoot to find medicine, of children who learn by candlelight because electricity is a dream. His hand brushed a glass of water on the table. For many, water is more precious than gold, and the fight for it is endless. The audience's eyes filled with tears. Trop's voice dropped to a whisper, but the greatest battle is inside us all. Battle to not give up. The room wasn't a stage anymore. It was a quiet witness to a man who carried the hopes of thousands. A smile flickered on Traore's lips. Fragile but real people often ask me how I stay strong. The answer is simple. He paused. I remember the smiles, the children who laughed. Despite the dust and pain, their smiles give me strength. The camera focused on his eyes. Calm, yet fierce, there was a boy named Musa. He lost his home to war, but never lost his laughter. Tro's voice cracked slightly. I promised him I would work, so his smile, and the smiles of millions like him, would never fade. The studio audience held their breath. Jimmy nodded slowly, no longer the interviewer, but a listener sometimes. Strength is not in fighting enemies, but in protecting hope. The silence was filled with reverence. This was no longer a comedy show. It was a call to see the world through someone else's eyes, and to feel what others feel. Traore's calm words filled the studio like a soft storm. For too long, my people's voices have been drowned out tonight. I am grateful to speak, not as a soldier, but as a soldier, but as a son, a brother, a father. He glanced at the camera as if speaking to every home. Watching change begins when the world listens with an open heart. Jimmy, once poised to ridicule, now sat silently humbled. The audience was no longer a crowd, but a community bound by shared tears and truths outside the studio. Social media exploded. Millions watched the exchange unfold, not as entertainment, but as a revelation. For in Tro's calm, powerful words, the world saw not just a man, but the beating heart of a nation. And the message was clear: when the world listens, hope becomes unstoppable. Tro's voice softened, almost a whisper. When I look at my people, I carry a promise made to mothers who bury their children too soon, to fathers who return home empty-handed, and to children who dream. Despite the darkness, he took a breath. This promise is not easy, it is heavy, but it is what keeps me going. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. I promise to fight for peace, for schools, for clean water, to fight so that no child has to know hunger or fear. Jimmy's usual smirk was gone, replaced by a look of quiet respect. It is easy to laugh when you do not carry such burdens, but for me it is life and death. The studio felt still, as if holding its breath for my people. Hope is a fragile flame. I am here to protect it with everything I have. The words settled like a gentle storm, powerful and moving. No one in that room could forget the weight of Tro's promise. The camera zoomed in on Tro's calm face. Some heroes wear armor, some wear smiles. He glanced around the studio. I am just a man with faults and fears, but I choose to face them because I believe in something greater than myself. A tear slipped from the eye of a viewer. It is the quiet heroism of every day. People, farmers, teachers, nurses who inspire me. Traore's voice was steady. They are the true warriors. They face hardship without applause, without cameras. Jimmy nodded slowly. Tonight I see the hero not just in uniform, but in every heart that beats for justice. The audience was moved beyond words. What started as a comedy show had become a sacred space of truth, a place where courage was real and tears were welcome. Suddenly, the tone shifted. Jimmy's voice, usually sharp and teasing, softened. Captain, I have to admit, I underestimated you. Trop smiled gently. That's okay, many have. But then with quiet strength, Traore said something unexpected. We all have moments when we are misunderstood. What matters is what we do afterward. The audience leaned in. This moment, right now, is our chance to listen, to understand, to change. The room felt electric. Not with laughter, but with hope. Tro's presence had transformed the space. By the end, it wasn't Jimmy who led the conversation, it was Tro, and the entire world was watching. The studio lights dimmed, slightly focusing all eyes on Traore tonight. The world watches not to judge, but to understand, he said softly. Outside, millions had tuned in. From cities to remote villages, what started as a comedy segment had transformed into a global moment of truth. Traore's calm words echoed beyond the screen. He spoke of resilience, of families rebuilding from ashes, of dreams held close. Despite hardship, the tears in the audience were mirrored by countless others watching alone for the first time. Many saw the real faces behind the headlines, faces full of courage and hope. Jimmy sat silent, humbled by the weight of those words. The power shifted, not to mock or ridicule, but to uplift and unite. Traore's message was clear. Change begins when we truly see one another. Traore's voice grew stronger, filled with hope. I came here not to be a punchline, but to be a voice. He paused, eyes bright, because every voice matters. He spoke of peace, unity, and the power of standing together. Even when the world feels divided, we can choose to be the light. Jimmy nodded, his laughter replaced by quiet respect. The studio audience erupted in applause. Not for a joke, but for the truth. Traore's calm courage had turned the tide. What began as an attempt to humiliate became a lesson in dignity the world had witnessed something rare, a man rising above hate with grace and strength as the interview ended. Traore looked into the camera to everyone watching. Remember, this moment his voice was soft but filled with power. When we choose understanding over judgment, hope over fear, we can change our world. Jimmy rose and shook Traore's hand, genuinely moved the audience, stood tears shining in their eyes, and as the cameras cut, millions shared the moment, spreading Traore's message far and wide. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and comment below. Share your thoughts, and let's keep this conversation alive. Together, we can build a world where respect and hope always win, because sometimes the quietest voice has the loudest echo.